Hope is not a necessary emotion. It does not have anything to do with our biological upbringing. It's not a survival skill. I would almost say that hope is a learned emotion, and I think that's why it's so hard for people to, number one, understand it, number two, accept it and utilize it, because it's not natural to our brains, to our minds, to our perception to incorporate hope, right?
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Believe the Hope podcast. I am here with Bobbi Oliver. Bobbi Oliver is an entrepreneur located in Denver, Colorado. She has a background in business and economics, and she has successfully started, built, and sold multiple businesses over the past 5 years. Currently, Bobbi's primary focus is on real estate investing, particularly in land acquisitions and development across Colorado. She's working with the city of Denver to create more affordable housing options. She attributes her success to the support of friends and the invaluable guidance of her mentors. Bobbi has big plans for the future and is excited for the opportunities to make an even greater impact in her community. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yeah, so we met at a, mastermind or entrepreneur dinner in Vegas with Dave Meltzer and Sean and Lacey from Black Diamond Club. And obviously we got to talking. I was inspired by your story because the fact that, like you said, you're 26 and you've already built and sold and did these businesses even at a young age. And I think that's important because I know we talked a little bit before we started recording here about how sometimes the younger generation or the generation that everybody feels like they can't contribute because it's that whole fear of, like, I think every generation says that about the other one behind it. It's just like they're going to ruin everything when everything ends up turning out okay. So one, I was really impressed. I learned a lot from your perspective on business and success in life, which I think multiple people, if they just stop talking and listen, you can learn from all different avenues and ages and everything. So
Absolutely agree. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So my first question that I always ask is, because everyone has a different perspective on it, is what does hope mean to them personally?
Love this question so much, and it is so underrated. Like, this topic, I think, is so underrated. I wish I had, like a definition, and I don't. I think more I just have multiple experiences throughout my life where I can say that's an example of what hope is. But I think, to put it shortly, I would just say that hope is the belief that the best potential is possible. There's equal opportunity for good and bad in the world. And so if you think that the worst is going to happen, you're probably going to get that. If you think the best is going to happen, you're probably going to get that. Now, I say probably, right? I don't say it's a certainty that you will get that, because we don't control everything. But I am a big believer that we get what we're looking for, and that is what hope is. Hope is the idea that there is something better that we can strive for, that if we look for it, we will find it.
Yeah, I like that. Was that JFK that said that quote? But if you believe you can or can't, I don't know if that was JFK, but it's whatever that quote is.
If you believe you can or can't, either way, you're right.
Right, yeah. So I think that goes in the whole perspective. And for the historians, if they're like, this guy's crazy, he just said JFK said that. I don't know. I'm just
put a nice name on it. It'll sound better.
He gave a speech with that quote in it. I don't remember. Either way, it's that. Yeah, if you believe you can or can't, you're both men are right. And that is, it helps you shift in that perspective of giving you opportunity or stepping into something, which I like.
There are so many possibilities. So many.
Do you have a personal journey or story where you had to kind of dig deep in that and that believe in that definition of hope for you that pulled you out of that situation?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's so many, and I think it happens like more often than it should. I tend to be like unrealistically optimistic. It's one of my downfalls. I say it's a downfall because sometimes I can't see the realistic analysis, right?
Yeah.
I'll just be so unrealistically optimistic. And I think there's a difference between false optimism and hope. Hope, I think, is saying, I'll do everything I can for this to work out, and then I'll let go of the rest. And however it works out, I trust in that outcome. And so having that hope that that best outcome is available to you. I mean, I could give you an example from yesterday or from a week ago or 10 years ago. Like, I just have so many examples of that. And I think I've learned to lean into hope more than leaning into blind optimism or unrealistic optimism. I'll give you a very recent example. So crazy how stuff works. I buy and sell land here in Colorado, right? And I was actually, while I was in Vegas, I had just gotten home and I had like drove all night. I was exhausted and I get a phone call the next morning from someone who sold me a property. And they said, "Hey, did you hear about the fire?" And I was thinking, I know that there's fires all over Colorado, but I've been gone. What's going on? And now keep in mind, this person, she sold me this piece of vacant land up in the mountains. We don't really get a lot of fires up there. It was pretty unlikely. And she said, well, that the entire ridge where the property is at is burnt down. There was a really bad fire. It's burnt down. And instantly I just go into panic mode for a good 15 to 20 seconds, like trying to keep my cool though, right? Trying to be professional about this. And she says, she lives in like Minnesota now, like she's out of state, so she hadn't seen it yet. But she goes, yeah, I had a family member drive out there who lives nearby just to take a look and see how bad it was so I could let you know. And this person drove out there and they said, well, I'm not even going to take pictures because the property's fine. Everything else around it is burned. The trees are still there, the grass is still there. There's no changes to the property. And I immediately was just like calm. Now, that property value is going to stay the same. Nothing really changes for us. But while I was having that conversation with this person, between the panic and then the confidence that everything would be okay, there was that little bit of hope that said, man, I really hope that whatever comes of this is for the better. I hope that anyone who is close by the fire is okay. I hope that we're still going to have the same value in the property. I hope I can still resell this. I hope I can still build on it. Before I knew that the property was fine. And it happened all so rapidly, right? But it was that little ounce of hope of, I just think that everything won't just be fine, but that the outcome will be good or better than I could expect. And it was perfect. It was exactly as it should have been. The property's untouched and it was just amazing. And I was so grateful that everything was fine. But I mean, hope is one of those things where it's always gotten me to the next mile marker, right? Where you can't quite have the confidence because you don't have the experience in that situation yet. And so you're really just walking blindly in the direction that you think you're supposed to go. And I just have had so many instances of that fire being the most recent, but I constantly have those in my life. And it's what pushes me, I think, to keep going because I know that there's always something better waiting for me.
I do like how you said how within like 20 seconds that whole reality changed. And I think a lot of times we get information or news and our immediately reaction is to what's the worst possible scenario that this is going to have and how is it going to just ruin everything in my life. And then you literally just paused, stay calm, and then the ending was something totally everything was fine, it was perfect. And I mean, to not have any damage whatsoever, but just in general, like there was no damage and everything stayed the same. I think that's a good lesson for just you can find hope in just pausing and just yeah, which is easier said than done. I know I'm speaking to the choir for myself. My emotion, yeah, I tend to react emotionally, not logically, which unfortunately that I have to usually take a step back before I say anything or do anything because I know I'll just yeah. But I think that's important too, that sometimes that space of information or news versus what reality is going to, which I think you touched on that instead of that unrealistic optimism or you have the hope and that hope can be in that gap of just space and calmness in that, or at least trying to be more calm and not think about how everything is ruined, but what, like you said, what the hope is and what the perspective on this and how is it going to be at the end of it, what's that all going to look like? And that's
Well,
scary. Yeah, that's scary.
yeah, very scary. Well, and you bring up a good point too, and I had thought about this prior to our call. Hope is not a necessary emotion. It does not have anything to do with our biological upbringing. It's not a survival skill. I would almost say that hope is a learned emotion, and I think that's why it's so hard for people to, number one, understand it. Number two, accept it and utilize it because it's not natural to our brains, to our minds, to our perception to incorporate hope, right? We're always looking, our brain immediately looks at worst case scenario. Am I safe? Are my resources safe? Are my assets safe? We don't think about, I really hope that everything is okay. It's usually, oh no, what just went wrong? Am I doomed? And so I think you have to have a high EQ in order to incorporate that hope, believing that everything will be better. And it's good to know, right? Because I think we can be so hard on ourselves for not being hopeful, when in reality, it's normal for us to not be hopeful and it's normal for us to struggle with feeling hopeful. It is a learned feeling. But once you do that, you learn it's a lot easier to maintain feeling hopeful. But it is practice. Practice, practice, practice of being hopeful.
And what do you think those practices to cultivate that hope if someone is, they've had a tough life? It seems like they're in that I've had these conversations where like, can something just go right like one time this week or month or whatever,
Yeah.
or the year, you have those where it just seems like everything is just like, oh, I just got punched in the face again for the 150th time. If you feel like it is a learned behavior, how are people cultivating that learned behavior? What are they looking for? What are they trying to surround themselves with to be able to find that and learn that behavior
That's
of
such a
hope?
good question. I love that. I think it does depend on the person, right? Like I am very prone to anxiety and I tend to worry about everything and I overthink everything. Not everyone's that way. But I know for me, who's more on the extreme side of anxiety, it takes a lot of self-awareness, which I'm horrible at for the most part, but we're trying. We're trying.
Good.
But having that self-awareness and saying, how am I feeling right now? Where are these feelings coming from? And how are they contributing to how I'm acting? I think understanding yourself and being fully honest with yourself about your emotions and your feelings is so important. And I say that for guys and for girls, right? Because we put on this external face of everything is okay. But I think we also put on a face for ourselves. We don't really allow ourselves time. We don't give ourselves grace for feeling negative or for feeling worried or for feeling hopeless. But I think if we could be honest with ourselves and say, I understand this is how you feel. That's okay to feel that way. Let's feel better somehow. How do we want to do that? You kind of have to play therapist with yourself. I do that a lot for me, and it's life-changing when you can just be honest and loving with yourself. So I would say that's number one on the internal side is that self-awareness. And then I think, externally, what contributes to us feeling hopeful, I would say, is being around other people who are hopeful. Like David Meltzer, who we both know and love, one of the most hopeful people you'll ever meet. And he has so much going on in his life. Like he has just I can't even imagine how much hope that person has to have to get through his day sometimes because
Hmm.
he just handles everything so well and he just has this confidence and hope almost. And so I know that like working with him one-on-one over the last, goodness, it's been almost a year, I think, has completely changed how I grasp onto hope and how often I use it, right? It's like a tool in your tool belt. It's up to you how often you want to use it. But being around people who are constantly hopeful, again, not unrealistically optimistic, but hopeful, having those circles. And then I would say just what you consume is so important. If I'm consuming negative news or if I'm consuming just stuff that wastes my time, like Instagram or, social media things that really serve no purpose, it's going to not encourage my brain to operate fully, right? Those neurons won't be firing. That creative part of my brain is not really working. And I think that's harmful to our brains because we're not going to get off of our phone and go into the real world thinking, oh man, I can work through anything today. You're essentially numbing yourself when you're just consuming negativity. And so if you have a negative experience, you're going to think about what you just saw, which is negativity. On the flip side, if you are looking for things that are hopeful, if you're reading good books, if you're listening to good music, if you're meditating, if you have these hopeful, positive thoughts, I think, and from my experience, you will go into the day, you will go into a situation with those tools in your tool belt easily accessible because you've been practicing them, you've been learning them day after day after day. So those are just a few tools that work for me. I'm sure there's a bunch of others. I know some people get tattoos or they have like, the words and the word wall art that says
Yeah.
hope or live, laugh, love, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Every
it differs
Airbnb
for everyone
in
for sure.
America has live, laugh, love everywhere on it. Everywhere
Of
on it.
course, how could it not? That's a staple of America. Live,
Staple
laugh,
of
love.
America's Airbnbs or your grandma's house.
Or your grandma's
Or
house,
her
yes.
grandma's house. Yeah, and I want to have Believe the Hope podcast, so keep listening as a tool for others to, if they're going through a rough time, that they can listen to an interview that of someone in similar situations, demographics, professional, whatever it is, can listen to it, these interviews and find that hope as well. I do, like you
Love
said,
that. See, another good tool. You're
yeah,
building a tool right now. You probably
building
didn't
a
even
tool.
realize what you're doing.
I'm just doing. This is fun, so and it's I think it's necessary to have more hope and
So
positivity in the
necessary.
world.
Yes, love that.
You said that you said something too, where you don't basically take inventory on yourself, and I think that's important as well. I feel like we lie to ourselves a lot to try to make
Big time.
everything,
Oh, all the time.
yeah, all the time. And I know some of my coaches, I've even heard Dave say it before, of different ways they described it, but essentially it's keep the promise you made to yourself. So if you're struggling, if you're going for something, if you're trying to make your life better, you're going to go through a lot of, there is pain and growth, there is pain and not necessarily bad pain, but just uncomfortable pain in general. But keeping the promise to yourself and keep showing up of how you want to show up into the world, I think that can cultivate a lot of hope, because you're constantly, this is how I'm going to show up in the world, and how anybody takes that's not my responsibility. But I know I can always show up and keep that promise to myself when things are chaotic or things aren't going well, or just all different things that life throws at us on a 24/7 basis, or social media or
Absolutely.
whatnot.
Yeah, you have to keep that promise to yourself. Like, and you're right, Dave always says be kind to your future self. I don't know about you, but I did not understand what he meant for like the longest time. And then I read his book and like started working with him one-on-one, and it finally clicked with me. I got to show up for myself and I got to show up for my future self. Got to be kind to my future self. Like, I love that so much.
How does one of our listeners or just individually help bring more hope to their community or their world,
Ooh,
and building quotation marks, because everybody's world is a little different. So it may be family, it may be their community, it may be church, it may be whatever, business, whatnot. What is that? How would you say that people do that?
that's hard because everyone is so different. I think like I talk about this with my partner quite frequently. Are you familiar with like the 16 personality test? The
Slightly. I have it.
Myers-Briggs?
Myers-Briggs. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so good. It's such a good test. And I'm not a big personality test taker, but it's funny because he and I share the same personality, except he's analytical and I'm more emotional. And we just realized this like a couple weeks ago, and I've thought so much about it. And I realized my version of hope is not going to be his version of hope. And his version of hope isn't going to be someone else's version of hope, right? And so, I mean, everyone is so different. I think whatever someone wants to call it, whether it's faith or hope, and however they want to utilize it, I think that's really like a question that's individualized. I would almost say you need to write this down. Like, what would I define hope as? And how am I using it every single day? Because it does look different for everyone, and everyone's going to apply it differently. But what we do know about hope that is a universal truth, is that hope is a positive emotion, right? And so no one's ever going to be evil and say, I'm going to use hope for bad, right? Hope is a positive emotion. It depends on how you want to apply it. And so being in check with yourself, and I think asking, what emotions am I feeling? If I want to feel hopeful, what does that look like for me? And then how am I passing that out to everyone else? How does everyone else also perceive that hope? How am I being an example of hope? I think those are all probably good questions, but it's just different for everyone, man. Like, that's why I love people. I love the psychology of how people, operate and what everything means to them, because hope might mean something completely different to me than it means to you. It might mean something different to a Lutheran than it might to a Catholic, or, there's so many different examples we could use. But that's what I would say. Start writing stuff down. Start asking yourself what it even means to you and how you're going to use it.
And I think the more people that do that and they find that, I think it spreads, that positivity does spread. So if more
Absolutely.
people are practicing hope in their lives, I think just naturally the people that they surround themselves with, if they're around the right people, if they're in the right groups, if they're in the right community, it's contagious and it will just spread as well. So yeah, that's
It's not ignorable. Like, hope, you cannot ignore hope, especially when you hear other people say, I just believed that it would work out exactly as it was supposed to, and it did. And that's how they live their lives. And you start to realize that you're like missing out if you're not being hopeful. And it's so funny because the more you spend time with those people, the more you start to think that way, which I love. Like, that's one of the things I love about Dave's group, is everyone in there is so hopeful, and they've achieved so much, and they just believe that they can keep achieving, and they just keep adding to their group, and it is contagious, but it's the best disease I would want to catch.
Yeah, I mean, when we were just at the dinner, I mean, we had been going all day, everybody like traveling or just whatnot, or we did the podcast interviews and we just been going all and then the meetup and just going all day. But then we were at the
Yeah.
interview, it's almost like you got a second wind because everybody was just excited to share their knowledge and expertise and help people and offer hope with, some of the panel discussion and everything was offering more hope and with people and some of the questions. And I felt like it was just I was like, I'm tired, but it almost like right before dinner, but you got a little good food in you and you got, you surrounded yourself with these people and it was contagious. I felt like I got a second wind out of it. And it was, like,
Yeah,
this
it's
is why I'm showing up to
energizing.
these things because
Uh,
you don't get this everywhere on a regular basis.
Well, and I think you had told me that you weren't planning on going to the event originally, and then
Yes,
something in you just said, I need to go,
I
right?
needed to go. Yeah. This is what has spawned from that by going.
I love it.
So that's just hope right there of how this all started was because it was something that I wasn't going to go to. And then it, yeah, but then that gut punch, I think that every once in a while we have, and that there's a lane that you have to go. If you don't, that opportunities maybe never come again. And so, yeah, so it was nice.
And this
Anyway,
is one of them, and it worked out.
it
I love
worked
that
out.
for you. That's so great.
It worked out. Any other insights you would like to add about hope or anything that we didn't cover that may inspire others?
I feel like I always have like a good book recommendation or something. But I
Just
don't
not
know.
think of it right
Read the
now.
Bible.
Read the Bible.
And I'm not even Christian anymore. Read the Bible about hope, though, because it'll
Read-
teach you things.
Teach you things. Okay.
Um, yeah, but it's there's so much to be hopeful for, and we can choose to look at the bad, we can choose to look at the good. It is really all about your perspective, and I'm not saying ignore the negativity and ignore the bad things that happen in the world. I think you can be aware of both, but ultimately you choose what to focus on, and focusing on the good, focusing on the optimism and the hope, and then bringing in the analytics so that you make the right decisions. Having that proper balance is crucial. And if you do that, you'll be just fine.
How can people connect with you more? They want to learn more about what you do, or they want to work with you, or they were inspired by your interview and want to learn more from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm ramping up my social media right now as well because I'm pretty terrible about using it. But you can email me bobby.r.oliver@gmail.com. Feel free to message me on Instagram, which is at Bobby the Builder 2.0. And those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me until I get some more contacts up.
Some more
Because right now
content.
it's pretty blank.
That's awesome. Is Bobby the Builder 2.0? Is that off the Bob the Builder like cartoon or TV show or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, I used to get made fun of for my name because Bobby is more like a boy's name, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
am named after my grandpa. And
Mm-hmm.
so as kids, everyone would just joke like Bob the Builder. And then
Yeah.
when I got older, I thought Bobby the Builder sounds pretty badass. And
Yeah.
then I got into real estate after that. Like I got into building houses and buying land after that. And so it's funny how it's correlated, my name and what I do. For but yeah, Bobby the Builder 2.0, and it's very fitting for
Yeah.
sure.
And that's another, I guess, another example of hope that you had in yourself, and that it all ended up
Absolutely.
working out in your favor as a land real estate person now, and now you're building
Yes.
lots. Now you're doing lots of Bobby the Builder.
All the time. That's what we live for.
Yeah. And can you say your email one more time just to make sure that was
Yeah, of course. So it's Bobby Bobby.
perfect? Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I love these interviews just because I learn different people's perspective on hope, but also I learn from the person themselves. Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing your story, your expertise,
Of
and
course.
and in Vegas, I appreciate learning from you and your expertise on entrepreneurship and just business owner and just having a different perspective from what I do on a regular basis. It's refreshing and it's fun. It's awesome to learn from
I
people.
hear you.
So,
Thank you
and
so
I
much for having me. I'm so glad that we got to meet up and have gotten to know each other. So looking forward to getting to know you more, and I'm sure I'll see you at another meetup, hopefully soon.
yeah, at some point in time, I'm sure I'll yeah. I know Sean and Lacey and they do stuff together all the time. So I'm sure I'll be somewhere that you're at in the near future. But thank you so much, Bobby.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thank you, Paul.